Hi there, it's Mark, and today in Lightroom we're going to look at applying contrast without applying contrast. Very zen. You've got to sit in a lotus position and cast dried chicken bones across the desk in the midnight on a full moon to be able to apply contrast without contrast. What do I mean? Okay, in Lightroom the basic tonal controls are exposure, contrast, highlight, shadows, whites and blacks. And I'm putting it to you that you should forget about contrast largely and use the others in combination to achieve better contrast. I've got some pictures which you can have a play with, and they're on my website in a zip file, and the link to that zip file is down below. But first I'm going to show you two examples before I roll the titles and I say something more esoteric about contrast without contrast, and before, more importantly, before I fill my coffee cup, and then we'll get cracking. So here's the example. This picture and the variants of it you're about to see have all had their exposure increased by the same amount, about half a stop, just to brighten the picture just a little bit. Other than that, the tonal controls we'll talk about. This is it with contrast applied. So before and after, you can see how it's darkening the clouds, it's brightening the sky, and it's adding a bit more drama, a bit more grit, a little bit more punch. But it's also losing detail. You're losing detail on the bikes, on the outfits, in the gravel, and so on. This next one is my version of the same thing. So compare that to the original. There's the original, there's my version. No contrast applied, purely using other sliders, and now we see it's far more rich in the sky. There was the one with just contrast, there's my version, there's the original. I'll go through those three again and look at the sky in particular. We're talking about bringing out the detail but also darkening things. So there's my version, there's with contrast. It makes a difference, and yet we're bringing out detail, we're still putting darks and such in compared to the original. Hopefully that makes sense. Let's try one with colour. This is Ella. So when we're looking at this, we've got loads of white. Picked this particularly because there's a lot of white, a lot of black, and there's some foliage which has got lighter and darker bits in. So let's watch that. Again, all versions of this have had the same amount of exposure, just to lift it a little bit. Other than they're all identical. Other than that, so this is the original. This is it with contrast, and you can clearly see how the contrasts work. Some of the black in the bike has just really gone black, but to the expense of detail perhaps. And the white has got white to the expense of detail. This is my version. Compare my version to the original. You can see how it has had a punch. The blacks are blacker, the whites are whiter, but the detail is still there. So contrast, what I'm calling my version, and original. So if that's something you want to find out more about, stick around, download the files we're going to play with. I'll throw these two in so you can have a play with those as well. What else is there yet? I've got to get coffee, I'm going to roll the titles, and we will get cracking very shortly. Okay, joking aside, contrast is useful. It does have its place and I use it. However, I tend to do a lot of black and white, and possibly that's why it's more noticeable on a day-to-day for me. But contrast can muddy some of the tones close to the blacks and muddy some of the tones close to the whites. It gives me that nice separation and punch, but I lose some of that detail. In situations like that, which is not every picture, that's why I'm suggesting abandoning contrast and using the 4 other tonal controls in a more measured way. A quick look through 3 control pictures which are in the pack to demonstrate 1 or 2 little things about what this principle is, and then we'll do some practical edits. So in this first control picture, we can see we've got black bars through to white bars. They're all evenly spaced, And the histogram tells us that too. So the histogram always shows you the amount of tone in your picture, separated from blacks on the left to whites on the right, and the vertical height is how much of that tone. So because we've got a series of tones coming up and they're all the same, you can see that spread across the histogram. And the reason for using the histogram is not only will we see this visually, but I think it's more telling on the histogram if I now bump up contrast. Those lines have shot over to the outside. Adding a lot of contrast is like putting your hand between a pair of curtains and throwing them to one side. It rooks up. But this is where the problem is. Just down here in this little bit and just up here, where that rooking is starting to lose some detail. Look how we've lost some of the definition here, and we've certainly lost a lot of the definition down here from where it originally was. I'm suggesting that use other 4 controls here will give a better result in certain circumstances. Let's have a look at a variation of this, and let's see those curtains being opened again. Contrast up and back. Whereas if we bring the highlights down and the shadows up, and you don't have to do much with this particular picture because it's such a controlled picture, it's very artificial. But now what we've done is that initial swoop that was, we've evened it all out, and then we just want to get a little bit of that white back because we lost the extreme. So we'll bring that back up, and you can see in the histogram at the top there, it's just edging up, and the blacks, we're bringing that back down. So there we've got the punch we wanted between white and black, and we haven't dragged too much of that mud into our picture from either end. Final controlled picture before we get on to some edits, I promise. This is colour, and I've only included this to show you how, although it's obvious, we tend to forget. Contrast impacts your colours. So sometimes after you've done a tonal edit, not just with this technique, you've done a tonal edit, it's worth stepping back and having a second thought about, did that impact any of our colours? If I do contrast now to extreme, we're doing the same thing, impacting colour. There's no black and white here, but we've lost some bars that seem to have melded into one, or approaching that, because of the use of contrast. Whereas bringing the highlights down and the shadows up, and then addressing the whites and the blacks, we've lost a lot less of those bars, but we've rendered a bit more contrast into this picture. They were artificial pictures, so a little goes a long way to demonstrate the process. This doesn't though. Let's put a bit of contrast into this. This picture I think needs to be a little bit brighter. Contrast in here. I never watch over here, and to be honest I don't usually use a histogram. Once I've got my finger on the slider, I either wobble it totally and find a point I want, or I just take my time a little bit and I'm watching the picture. I never watch where my mouse is over here, and I think somewhere around there. Backslash key for before and after, but I'm not necessarily a fan. It's just losing a little bit too much detail for me. So I'd rather in this instance do what I said we would do, which is I'm going to bring the highlights down, and particularly up here in the clouds you should see a lot of more definition come in. A little goes a long way. Lift the shadows, and here I'm looking at, for example, the foreground gravel, but I want to compensate for the contrast, so I am actually going to push the whites back up and bring the blacks down. So although I've added whites and blacks in and increased the overall contrast, let's take a look with the before and after. I'm actually bringing more detail into both the gravel and the clouds there, as well as component parts of the bike. So these are pictures we've not seen before. There are 3 of them, and I want to do an edit. So I'll just do a general edit first. So I think on this I would like to crop this. I don't think the building is quite straight, so I'm going to do that. Bring this here, and I'll bring this in here. possibly there, I think. I'm happy with that as a crop. You can dilute the taste. I would put a little vignette on just to draw the eye in a little bit. And then I think this needs a little bit of clarity for the crystal balls. Now, as to adding contrast, well, you know what? I love the way contrast is working inside the crystal balls. I'm not a fan of how muddy the top of those towers and everything are being outside. So this is a case where even if I do our trick, down with the highlights, up with the shadows, which is a generally recognized way of doing an edit, up with the whites, down with, nope. Our preferred contrast, I think, inside the crystal ball. So what am I going to do here is, and this is a very important lesson, you don't necessarily have to use these globally. Let's do it as a targeted adjustment. Masks, subject, which I'm hoping will just be the crystal balls. It is. I love the contrast. I'm going to put that contrast back in there. Do I want to dehaze it? Just a bit. I think they now completely and really pop. I now want to edit everything else with the other tonal controls, but not impact those. So if I select this and duplicate the mask and invert it, it will give me everything else. Now I can come into that and I can bring the highlights down. I think we're going to put exposure up a little bit as well. Blacks, only a tiny little bit on the blacks. Shadows, you know what, I like what that shadow's doing there, especially around the grounds, but not necessarily up above. So I'm actually going to switch shadows off here. I'll come back to shadows in a second, and then whites. Now I said I liked what the shadows were doing on the ground here, so I'm going to create a new mask, linear gradient, and I'm going to just take it roughly about there, and I'm going to subtract the subject, and it just gives me roughly the ground. And now I'm going to address those shadows by lifting them, and that would be my edit before and after. Here we've done essentially the same thing, but we've utilized masks to make it even more powerful. There's nothing wrong with global edits, but I would suggest always be mindful that when you're changing a slider, to think, oh, that's just wrong. Oh, but I liked it in that part. If you can say that, I liked it in that part, or I liked it in that color, then you should also be thinking, I can mask that and make it exactly what I want. Alright, this is a segment of the high level bridge going over the Tyne, and this is our last picture. So I think I'll pause now to say the usual of, if you're getting anything at all from this, if you learned anything at all, it's piqued your interest at all, please give this video a like. And while you're down there, click on the subscribe button to join the channel and ring that bell to be notified of future releases. And we've covered a bit of masking here. I recently completed a 6-part mastering masks course, which is available here on YouTube for free. Just check out the either playlist or the courses link on my channel. I do like this picture. It's part of a series called Bits Of, where I photograph just bits of iconic architecture around Newcastle. But I digress, and I included this because I thought this works with both. So I think without much editing at all, contrasting this, because it's tending towards silhouette and there's a bit of an interest there with the person walking across, is good. And I'd be happy almost with that edit, with the exception of I want to take the blue out. There's a few ways of doing that. We could mask or all sorts, but let's just pop down into Colour Mixer and just take out the blue saturation. Okay, and go back to basics. And I'm quite happy with that as is. I might change the crop, just to accentuate things, something like that, and purposely keep it uneven. But let's go back. I said it might work both ways. Take that out, but I'm leaving the blue dropped. And let's lower the highlights here. And increase the shadows. I particularly like bringing the shadows out here because of the extra detail I'm getting in some of the girders and railings and things. But it's now overall a bit too flat, as we expected it is. So I'm going to make the whites a little bit up and the blacks a little bit further down. So before and after, we've addressed the blue and put contrast into that picture, possibly a bit more with the blacks actually. There you go. So it works for me with both. So it's not one shoe fits all feet here. And there's nothing, of course, to stop you doing a general contrast on top, but it's all to taste. And with that, I'm going to leave it there. I need another coffee. Bye for now.